All right, so this is a deep dive into a pretty harrowing story, the sea story, a luxury dive boat that sank in the Red Sea. It was on November 25th, 2024, and the initial reports kind of painted this picture of a tragic accident. But yeah, as we dig deeper into these firsthand accounts, from the 35 survivors, a much more complex narrative emerges.
Yeah, it does. I mean, the official reports kind of just focused on this large wave as the likely culprit. But when you look at what the survivors had to say, and then you bring in the expert analysis it reveals, like a web of other potential contributing factors, things like safety failings and even the design of the vessel itself.
Okay, so we're setting out to understand what really happened here. Beyond just those initial headlines, we've got a stack of sources here, survivor interviews, expert analyses, and of course those official reports. And our mission, I guess you could say, is to piece together a clearer picture of this whole tragedy.
Exactly, and this deep dive is crucial because it really highlights how important it is to kind of scrutinize those official narratives and to seek out multiple perspectives, to try to arrive at a more comprehensive understanding of events like this.
Right, and what's really striking is how those initial positive impressions of the sea story, this vessel was designed for like 6-day diving excursions, contrasts so starkly with these terrifying events that unfolded.
Oh, absolutely. One survivor, Luciana Galetta, she described the boat when she first got on as nice, big, clean, which just highlights this jarring disconnect between the initial perception of safety and then the chaos that ensued.
Yeah, and even before the sinking, there were these warning signs. Survivors talked about the boat feeling unstable the night before. Furniture was sliding around the deck. It was rough conditions. One even mentioned that a smaller inflatable boat actually slipped off the back. It seems like these red flags were either just dismissed or totally downplayed.
Well, yeah, I mean, this raises a critical question about the crew's response to these early indicators of potential trouble. I mean, were these signs adequately addressed? Was there some sort of lapse in communication or a failure to, recognize how serious the situation was?
Yeah, it's unsettling to think that these early warnings might have been missed or ignored. And then at 3 a.m., bam, disaster struck. The sea story flips, plunging everyone into darkness and chaos.
Oh, man. Can you imagine the terror of being jolted awake in the middle of the night like that? Disoriented, suddenly fighting for your life. I mean, the survivors' accounts of those frantic moments, they paint a harrowing picture of the scramble to escape.
Absolutely. And the escape routes actually varied dramatically, depending on where people were on the boat. Isora Gonzalez, her cabin was on the starboard side. That's the side that hit the water.
4 Britons appear to be among the missing after a tourist yacht sank in the Red Sea. The sea story sank off the coast of Egypt
most of the
with 45
fatalities are
people
those
on
missing.
board. 28 of whom have been rescued.
Right, and this brings us to one of the most compelling survival stories.
At least 17
the
people
story
are
of
missing, and the
Luciana
whereabouts of the
Galetta
British
and her partner
passengers is
Christoph.
not yet known. The boat sank off
They
the
found
south of the
themselves
coastal town of
trapped
Marsa Alam with
in an air
31
pocket
tourists of various
for
nationalities
35
on board, along
agonizing
with
hours.
14
35 hours.
It
It's
is not
hard to
yet
even
clear what
fathom the
caused the
psychological
four-deck
and
boat
physical
to sink,
endurance
but the
required
Egyptian
to survive an
Meteorological
ordeal like
Authority
that.
on Saturday
Their story
warned
is a
about
testament to the
turbulence and
human
high
will
waves
to
on the Red
survive.
Sea,
But it
and
also
advised
raises some
against
serious
maritime
questions about the rescue
activity for
efforts.
Sunday and
Absolutely. I mean, if they could
Head to
survive for 35
thetimes.com
hours
for
in an
more
air
on this
pocket,
story as it
why weren't they
develops.
located and rescued sooner? This points to a potential delay in the response and the possibility that the initial search efforts weren't as thorough as they should have been.
And to add another layer of complexity here, this official narrative of this massive 4-meter wave causing the boat to capsize, it's being challenged by both survivors and expert analysis.
Yeah, Sarah Martin, she's a doctor who survived the sinking. She stated that the waves they encountered once in the water weren't actually that big. And so this discrepancy between the official account and what the survivors experienced, it prompted Dr. Simon Boxall, a leading oceanographer, to examine the weather data from that day.
Okay, so what did Dr. Boxall find? Did his analysis support that 4-meter wave theory?
His findings directly contradict those initial reports. He determined that the largest waves recorded on that day were around 1.5 meters, which is nowhere near the size that was initially claimed. And this debunking of the wave theory opens the door for other potential contributing factors to be investigated.
Such as?
Well, Dr. Boxall suggests that pilot error, vessel design flaws, or a combination of both could have played a significant role in the sea story's capsizing. And this aligns with warnings issued by the UK's Marine Accident Investigation Board, also known as the MAIB, about about safety
Four
concerns
Britons
with
are
Red
feared to
Sea
be
diving
among the missing
operations.
after a
The
tourist
MAIB,
yacht
could you
sank in the
explain
Red
what
Sea.
that is
The
and
Sea
why its
Story
warnings are
sank off the
significant in
coast
this
of Egypt
context?
with 45 people on board.
The MAIB,
28
or
of
Marine
whom
Accident
have been
Investigation
rescued. Some
Branch,
tourists
it's
were
a UK
airlifted to
government
receive
agency,
medical treatment. At
and
least
they're
17
responsible
people are
for
missing,
investigating
and the
marine
whereabouts
accidents.
of the British
They have the
passengers
authority
is
to
not yet
conduct
known.
independent
The boat
inquiries
sank off the south of
and
the
to issue
coastal
safety
town of Marsa
recommendations.
Alam, with
Their
31
warnings about
tourists
Red
of
Sea
various
diving are
nationalities on
particularly
board, along
noteworthy
with 14
because
crew
they stem from a
members. It is
pattern of
not yet clear
incidents,
what caused
some
the
even
four-deck
involving the
motor yacht
same
to sink,
company that
but the
operated the
Egyptian
Sea Story,
Meteorological
Dive Pro
Authority on
liveaboard.
Saturday
So this
warned
wasn't an
about
isolated
turbulence and
incident.
high
There's a
waves on the
broader
Red Sea,
context
and
of
advised
safety
against
concerns in the
maritime
region that needs to be
activity for
addressed.
Sunday
Exactly.
and Monday.
And the
Head to
MAIB's
thetimes.com
warnings
for more on
highlight
this
the need for
story
a
as it
thorough
develops.
investigation into the Sea Story sinking to determine if there were systemic failures that contributed to the tragedy.
It seems like we're moving away from this simple explanation of a freak wave and towards a more complex understanding of potential human error, operational shortcomings, and perhaps even industry-wide safety issues.
It's looking that way. As we dig deeper into the events that unfolded after the Sea Story capsized, even more questions kind of come up about those safety measures and, the whole rescue response.
Right, because even for the people who managed to escape the sinking vessel, I mean, their ordeal was far from over at that point. They had to face a whole new set of challenges once they got to those life rafts.
Yeah, that's right. The survivors' accounts reveal a pretty disturbing lack of essential supplies and equipment in the life rafts. Sarah Martin, the doctor we were just talking about, she described the life jackets as, malfunctioning. The light's not working. They even found a torch, but it didn't have any batteries.
You're kidding. That's incredibly concerning. I mean, you'd think basic safety gear would be, top priority in a situation like this. What about, food and water? Were the rafts properly stocked with that stuff, at least?
Shockingly, no, despite the passengers being told during their safety briefing that the rafts were equipped for this kind of emergency. They were empty, no food, no water. They even said the flares looked like they had been used previously.
With 45 people on board.
That's a major lapse in safety protocol.
Some tourists were airlifted to receive
some survivors are alleging that the captain took one of the only 3 blankets for himself, leaving one for the crew and only one for all the passengers.
I know, it's hard to believe. All these accounts really paint a picture of a chaotic and potentially negligent response to this whole crisis. It raises serious questions about whether the crew was prepared and just the overall safety culture on board the Sea Story.
It really is hard to believe that such basic necessities were overlooked. So how long were the survivors left stranded in the life rafts before help finally got there?
Rescue vessels reached them around 11:00 a.m. on November 25th, so that's about 8 hours after the capsizing. But remember, for Luciana and Christoph, those two trapped inside the air pocket, the wait was so much longer.
Yeah, their story is a stark reminder that while some survivors were rescued relatively quickly, others were left on their own for an extended period, with seemingly very little effort from the official rescue teams to even locate them.
And Luciana. She's been quite vocal about her experience. She's expressed feelings of abandonment and is questioning why it took 35 hours for them to be found, especially since they could hear the rescue helicopter above them.
Well, that begs the question, if the official rescue teams couldn't find them, who did come to their rescue?
It's a remarkable story, actually. A local Egyptian diving instructor named Khattab al-Faramawi, who just happened to be the uncle of the dive guide trapped with them. He took it upon himself to search the submerged wreck.
Oh, wow. So a volunteer diver was the one who finally found them. That's both incredible and concerning. I mean, it speaks to his bravery, but it also kind of underscores the potential shortcomings of that official rescue operation.
Exactly. Khattab's actions were heroic. There's no doubt about that. But they raised some serious questions about why the Egyptian Navy had to rely on a volunteer to locate and rescue those individuals trapped inside the hull.
It makes you wonder if they had a lack of resources or the equipment,
Some
or maybe
tourists were
even the
airlifted to
expertise on
receive
the part
medical
of those
treatment.
official response
At least
teams
17
in this
people
case.
are missing, and the whereabouts
It's starting
of
to
the
feel
British
like a story of
passengers
two
is not
narratives.
yet known. The boat sank
The
off
official
south
account
of
is
the coastal
focusing on
town
this
of
freak
Marsa
wave.
Alam, with
And then you have the
31
survivors'
tourists of various
experiences
nationalities on board,
that are
along with
revealing this
14 crew
much more
members.
complicated
It is not yet
reality
clear what caused the
of
four-deck motor
potential
yacht to sink,
negligence,
but the Egyptian
inadequate safety
Meteorological
measures,
Authority on Saturday
and a delayed
warned
rescue
about turbulence
response.
and
That's
high
a great way to
waves
put
on
it.
the
And
Red
as we
Sea,
look closer at
and
the
advised
details,
against
it
maritime
becomes
activity
increasingly
for
clear that
Sunday
relying
and
just on the
Monday. Head to
official narrative
thetimes.com for
would
more on
only
this
paint an
story as it
incomplete and
develops.
potentially misleading picture of what happened.
Absolutely. And in all of this, we can't forget the human cost of this tragedy. 11 people lost their lives or are still missing, and that's leaving behind grieving families and a community grappling with the unanswered questions surrounding this devastating event.
Yeah, it's important to remember that behind every statistic, every report, are real people whose lives have been, irrevocably altered. People like Jenny Cosson and Tariq Sanada, who, according to their friend Andy Williamson, meticulously researched the safety records of dive boats before each trip, and yet they were still switched to the Sea Story at the last minute. Their loss just adds another layer of complexity and sadness to this already harrowing event.
And the fact that a distress signal wasn't even received until hours after the capsizing just compounds the tragedy even further. It raises questions about the communication systems on board and what procedures they had in place for alerting authorities in an emergency.
Yeah, all these unanswered questions. That's exactly why a thorough and transparent investigation is crucial. It's not just about understanding what caused the Sea Story to sink, but also about identifying any systemic failings and actually implementing changes to prevent tragedies like this from happening again.
Speaking of the investigation, it's still ongoing, right?
4 Britons appear to be among the missing after a tourist yacht sank in the Red Sea.
Yeah,
the Sea Story sank off the coast of
being
Egypt
led
with
by the
45
Egyptian
people on board.
Maritime Safety
28
Authority,
of whom
and the
rescued.
UK's
Some
MAIB
tourists
is
were
also
airlifted to
involved
receive
because of
medical
those British
treatment.
victims.
At least 17
These
people are
investigations,
missing,
they usually
and the
involve a
whereabouts
pretty
of the
thorough
British
examination
passengers
of the
is not yet
wreckage,
known.
interviews
The
with
boat sank
survivors
off
and
the
crew
south of the
members,
coastal town
they
of
analyze the
Marsa
vessel's
Alam, with
logbooks and
31
maintenance
tourists
records,
of various
and they also
nationalities on
review,
board, along with 14 crew
weather and
members.
sea conditions
It is
at
not
the
yet
time.
clear what
So it's
caused
a
the
pretty
four-deck motor
multifaceted
yacht to
process
sink,
then,
but the Egyptian
aimed at
Meteorological
uncovering
Authority on
not just
Saturday
the
warned
immediate
about
cause of the
turbulence and
sinking,
high
but
waves on
also
the Red Sea,
any
and
underlying
advised
factors that might
against
have played a
maritime
role.
activity for Sunday
What are some
and
of the
Monday.
potential
Head to
outcomes of this
thetimes.com
investigation?
for more
Well, it
on
could
this
lead
story
to
as it
a
develops.
whole range of outcomes, recommendations for improved safety regulations, training procedures. There's even the possibility of legal action against the vessel's operators, or maybe even the manufacturers if they find design flaws. Ultimately, the goal is to pinpoint those root causes of the tragedy and put measures in place to prevent similar incidents from happening again.
It's a long and complex process, but hopefully it'll provide some answers and maybe even a degree of closure for the families of the victims. Thinking back to Luciana's words, she said, "We are lucky to be alive, but there are so many people who didn't come back from this, and I want their families to be able to grieve." Yeah, it's a poignant reminder that behind all those technical details and investigative processes, there are real human lives lost and forever impacted by this tragedy. Their stories, their experiences, their absence. It all has to be at the forefront of our understanding of what happened on the Sea Story.
Absolutely. And this deep dive, I think it's really highlighted how important it is to go beyond just those initial headlines and seek out multiple perspectives to gain a more, full understanding of events like this. That official narrative often only tells part of the story. And it's so important to listen to the voices of those who are directly affected, like those survivors. And
4 Britons appear to be among the
experts
missing after a
who can maybe
tourist
offer
yacht
a more
sank in the
nuanced
Red
and
Sea.
informed
The Sea
analysis.
Story sank
Yeah,
off the
I
coast
couldn't
of
agree
Egypt
more.
with 45
And this
people
brings
on
up a
board.
question I think is
28
important
of
for
whom
you,
have been
our
rescued.
listeners,
Some tourists
to
were
think about.
airlifted to receive
If
medical
you were
treatment.
planning a dive
At least
trip,
17 people
what
are
steps
missing,
would you
and the
take
whereabouts of the British
to make
passengers
sure you're
is not
safe?
yet
Yeah,
known. The
in
boat
light of
sank
this
off the
incident.
south of the coastal
Would you
town
look
of Marsa
into the
Alam,
vessel's
with
safety
31
records, the
tourists
crew's
of various
experience,
nationalities on
their
board,
emergency
along with 14
training?
crew members.
Would you check
It is
if
not
they
yet
even
clear
have
what
safety
caused the
equipment
four-deck
and what
motor yacht
condition
to
it's
sink,
in?
but the Egyptian
great question.
Meteorological Authority
And one that
on
underscores the
Saturday
importance
warned
of
about
making informed
turbulence and
decisions,
high waves on the Red
especially when we're
Sea,
talking about
and
activities
advised
that carry a
against
degree of
maritime
risk.
activity for
We often
Sunday
place a
and
lot of
Monday.
trust in
Head to
tour operators and
thetimes.com
service
for more on this
providers, but I
story
think it's
as it
crucial to be
develops.
proactive and do our own due diligence to ensure our own safety and well-being.
I agree. Knowledge is power. The more we know, the better equipped we are to make responsible choices and advocate for our own safety and the safety of those around us.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the tragic sinking of the Sea Story. It's a complicated story with a lot of layers that are still being uncovered, but we hope this exploration has given you a deeper understanding of the events, the questions that still haven't been answered, and what this all means for the diving industry.